All right, young scholars. So, some of the things I wanted to go over have to do with some of the stuff that you've been reading. So, I had you look up, hopefully, you went and found the Bob Dylan song, also the religious thing. Imagery is something that has been mentioned in one of the questions. It's something we're going to come back to, and it's important in this story. And an image in writing is something that appeals to any of the five senses: sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. And the story uses a few recurring images, but we'll go into that stuff later. Music is a constant image in the story and has significance. This is true of America at the time. Pop music defined this generation and sort of led them astray. This is the early 1960s, the setting is, and it's written in the late 60s, and that's the period where the Beatles and protest music of Bob Dylan all kind of made the kids kind of break away from their parents. Elvis had started that in the 50s. Some of the things about symbolism, I had mentioned in class that 3 is often considered a mystical number. There's a recurring image of flies that we're going to talk about when I go over some of the text. Flies, of course. So when you want to figure out what a symbol means, you might figure out where flies usually appear. They usually appear around things that are decaying or dying. Right. The highway is symbolic in a way that, again, was mentioned in the article. Well, the article mentioned how a river is often considered a symbolic thing in ancient or classical literature. So something like what's the river? The Nile in Egypt. A lot of biblical stories occur on that. In America, it was the Mississippi River. Why? Because the river was where cities were built. It is how you traveled. It took you from one place to another. And the highway is sort of the modern version of that. It connected places that had been disconnected before. So it was both a way of escaping. There's the famous Route 66, the romantic songs and stories about traveling across the country. It was the first road to go across the country that you could just hop in your car and change your life. It also meant that the highway connected small towns to big cities and the dangers that came with them. So much like the river, it has to do with the physical usefulness of it becomes a symbolic thing in stories because it's useful and dangerous at the same time. It represents growth or travel, and also access to another life or to danger. There are things in something like the mirrored sunglasses is something I learned when I was learning about film studies, and the last 3 have all to do with the idea of Arnold's friend as possibly a satanic figure. And the mirrored sunglasses hide the eyes of the character, and you may have heard of ideas like the eyes are the window to the soul. So if he has mirrored sunglasses, you can't see if he has a soul. You can't see anything about what he's thinking. So, and in film, there's movies from the 60s up until now, or actually throughout film, where a character might wear mirrored sunglasses. They might represent a satanic figure. If you ever watched, I'm sure you may not have, but Cool Hand Luke is a movie that sometimes Mr. Wadnick used to show. The character is pursued in that by a character who has 2 dogs and mirrored sunglasses. Again, a reference maybe to, it's both physically true because he's a sheriff hunting for an escaped or watching over prisoners. It's also in a movie by the Coen brothers. I can't think of the name right now. Anyway, the mirrored sunglasses with the dog, that's sort of a reference to Hades, but also hides the soul, like I was saying. The stuffed shoes that I'll point out as a description of him might be seen as, again, it could be a reference to the actual serial killer who shoved cans into his boots to look taller, or it could be possibly cloven or goat-like feet, which would fit with the devil concept. All right, these are the different lenses that you talked about, or that you read about. I'm not going to go into them right now. I'm going to actually switch over to the text itself and go over some of the text. Right. One of the things I mentioned about the number 3 being significant, you'll notice that Connie was 15. It's a multiple of 3. Her sister was 24. She still lived at home. There are these, again, the other lens that you might look at this through is the feminist lens, and we have here three female characters and a father who is disengaged with his family, which was not unusual for the family unit back then. Basically, the father brought home the money by which people lived, and the mother raised the kids. You have June, who fits one sort of archetype of what a woman should be in the 60s. She was a responsible, um, she wasn't good looking, so her role would be to be responsible until she sort of found a husband. Right? Everybody was very dependent. Women were very dependent on their husbands. That's just the way things were. I had mentioned that they couldn't get things like credit cards or a mortgage. It wasn't possible really to be independent because of the society. So um, just kind of scrolling through because I want to hit a lot of things. Again, even little things like the father of Connie's best girlfriend drove the girls 3 miles to town. Like I said, you'll keep seeing the usage of three. Everything about her had two sides to it. This speaks to that idea of her as a story about someone growing up. There's the childish side, all right, one for home and one for anywhere that was not her home. Her walk, which could be childlike and bobbing, or languid enough to make anyone think she was hearing music in her head. I've highlighted this because it's the first mention of music, which occurs throughout. Languid means sort of like flowing and I don't know, almost like she's slowly dancing to the music. So there's sort of an adult version of her, and there's a child version of her, which is very much what an adolescent is, someone who still has their Hello Kitty backpack and also wants a driver's license and complete freedom. Speaking of freedom, the highway comes here, and they cross the highway. It works as almost a barrier. Again, to compare it to ancient usages of the river, you cross the river Styx to go from life into the underworld after death. I'm not saying that she dies when she crosses the highway, but it is she has transgressed. She's gone where she's not supposed to be. Um, Her father, at this point, again, pushing the boundaries of her adulthood. She is seeking out the older boys. She has lied to her parents. Nobody knows where she is. All right, they went up through the maze of parked and cruising cars to the bright lit fly-infested restaurant. That's the first image of flies. Their faces pleased and expectant, as if they were entering a sacred building and that loomed up out of the night to give them what haven and blessing they yearned for. These are all highlighted in red because they're all religious terminology. They're all words used in religion. They sat at the counter across their legs and crossed their legs at the ankles, their thin shoulders rigid with excitement, and listened to the music that made everything so good. The music was always in the background like music at a church service. It was something they depended upon. All right, again, a religious reference, but also this is how important music is to them. It's the soundtrack. It is something, again, that divides one generation of this time from another. Okay, there is this moment she has where Connie couldn't help but let her eyes wander over the windshields and faces all around her, her face gleaming with a joy that had nothing to do with Eddie or even this place. It might have been the music. She drew her shoulders up and sucked in her breath with pure pleasure of being alive. And just at that moment, happened to glance a face just a few feet from hers. It was a boy with shaggy black hair in a convertible jalopy painted gold. So just as she has this feeling, again, she is across the highway. She's out with a boy. She's ditched her friend. Right, I skipped over that part. She's put herself into this sort of situation where maybe she's not ready to be in the situation, right? And that's when Arnold Friend appears. So one reading of it is this is the moment where she's kind of invited him into, if he's a satanic figure or even if he is just a symbolic character about sort of crossing a threshold. She has, in one sense, invited him. And he wagged a finger and laughed out loud. Now we know that he made an X with his fingers because we've read ahead. There's this part that I've highlighted in a terrible way. She spent 3 hours with him. So now this is not about Arnold Friend. The 3 hours she spent is with Eddie, all right, the kid that's referenced here. All right, and this is a thing that sometimes we might overlook. She spent 3 hours with him at the restaurant where they ate hamburgers and drank Cokes in wax cups that were always sweating. That's a very specific detail. Right? And then down an alley a mile or so away, And when he left her off at 5 to 11, only the movie house was still open at the plaza. So we have this really close-up detail of hamburgers and soda, and then there's just this quick reference to disappearing um, down an alley a mile or so away. Some people might wonder, what is she doing there, and how come it's not narrated? Maybe we'll talk about that in person because I want to keep moving. I'm highlighting things that are religious or spiritual in red. She couldn't hear the music at this distance, so as she gets in the car and leaves, the music is gone. Again, she is having a feeling, listening to music alone. She has crossed another threshold on Sunday. She has refused to do to go to the barbecue with her parents. This is again a sort of element of growing up where you stop doing the things that your parents always ask of you. You make a stand and you do what you want to do. Okay, there's again reference to three, and in fact something about the relationship with mom. Sometimes over coffee they were almost friends, but something would come up, some vexation, something that makes them angry. That was like a fly buzzing suddenly around their heads, and their faces went hard with contempt. One Sunday, Connie got up at 11. None of them bothered with church, and this is the time where she refuses to go with them. And in fact, when she thinks about the barbecue, again, flies are the image used to describe its negative side, right? And then Connie is in this strange state where she is thinking about not just the boy, but boys in general. Music is blended in with it. And this is where you might say that, again, she kind of is invoking or calling up Arnold's friend. It is either coincidence or the story is being used either allegorically or metaphorically to have him be sort of her, be something that represents adulthood or going too far at her age. All right, this is where the mind, where everything looks smaller. Her house looked smaller that they'd had for 3 years, and all of these are sort of references to sort of like when you go back to your middle school or your grammar school, and it all looks smaller to you because you've outgrown it. It's not physically that you're necessarily taller than you were in middle school. Some of you may be, but that's not. That's just your world looks smaller as you get older, like when you come back from college or something. Okay, so I'm just kind of characterizing it in a way that is not as literal as some of the interpretations that kids might want to accept initially. Right? Again, here's Arnold's friend with his numbers and his code. This is why people thought it might be significant. The randomness of the numbers is not something people wanted to accept. If you do the psychological lens, what you would want to do is look at how he is sort of manipulating her. He looks like everything she is attracted to. The way he's dressed, his muscular look. He plays sort of. He's playful with her, even though it is it is very artificial. The way he straightened and recovered from his fit of laughing at his own joke showed that it had all been fake. So there's these creepy things as this thing becomes more dangerous and he reveals who he is. He has been trying to sort of appeal to things that he knows she would like. Right? This deserves its own look, this conversation, but for now I just want to pause here because I'm running out of time on the recording and this has been a while. So I'm going to stop this and go back to class.